So let's tie this all together. In order to ground us into the reality of what we've seen through this beautiful music and dance tonight, we bring you a panel of formerly incarcerated individuals who, with their authenticity and truth, will lead us to a more realistic understanding of the issues of incarceration today. We're honored to have with us tonight Roz Smith, Jose Saldana, and Greg Mingo. Reverend Melissa Boyer, pastor of this church, Katona United Methodist Church, will be moderating. So thank you all again for being here. Please enjoy our panel.
Thank you. I am Melissa Boyer. I am the pastor of this church, and I've also served as an instructor and an academic coordinator for Rising Hope, which is a program which offers college-level courses to people in prisons. So that's something that I bring with me this evening. But I'd rather you hear a lot more about our three panelists. So I'd like to ask each of you if you could take a moment and just introduce yourselves and tell us about the work that you're doing.
This is on? Oh. Thank you for having me. My name is Rosalind Smith. I served 39 years and 5 months in prison. I was released in 2018, and I currently work for V-Day, which is a global organization that vows to end violence against women and girls. I also am a team leader with RAPP, Release Asian People in Prison.
Thank you. Jose Saldana, formerly incarcerated. I walked out of Greenhaven Correctional Facility 5 years ago after 38 years of incarceration. And I left behind some men who were very instrumental in me being the person I am today. So 2 weeks after I was released and celebrated my freedom, I knocked on RAPP's door to release Asian people in prison, and I reported for duty.
Yeah. Hello. My name is Greg Mingo. I served 40 years, 1 month, and 21 days in prison for a crime I didn't commit. And on September 16th of 2021, the governor granted me clemency and I was released. I also work with RAPP. I'm a Westchester community leader. I also work with Hudson Link, for higher education in prison. And I do work with CUNY Law School for clemency, resentencing, and parole issues.
Thank you. I'd love to hear in what ways did Got My Wings resonate with you personally and with your experiences in prison?
For myself, it's the first time I saw a ballet performance. And I was just struck by how somebody who's inside on death row could create a ballet. Mm-hmm. That's an accomplishment in and of itself. As I watched the performance, I tried to use my imagination to see what I was seeing. In other words, there were certain things that resonated with me. It's like when the young ladies was laying down and the other ones was picking them up. It made me think about not leaving people behind. And that's kind of what the work that RAPP does. We try not to leave anybody behind, particularly people that earn an opportunity to have a second chance. And then I noticed that when they were reaching for things and trying to pull things back from the air, it kind of resonated with the idea that those are the things that we cling to. We cling to so many things in life, and we try to hold on to them and pull them back in. And I was reading the program, and it made me think about freedom, what it really is. And I think freedom is a place where you find yourself. Because for me, I think that inside of all of us, we have this little internal committee, and it's comprised of 3 people: who we think we are, who other people think we are, and who we truly are. So that kind of resonated with me in that regard. And overall, I could identify with being home but not yet free, because there's all sorts of prisons. I think people don't have to be in prison to be in prison. You know, you could be in prison of a bad relationship, a bad job. It's all kinds of prisons. And it's up to us to decide who we are and how we escape. And I used to teach a lot of classes inside, and I was always asked the men, why is there a wall around a prison? And most people give you the common answer. So people can't get out, so nobody could escape, so on and so forth. So I would always ask them, do you ever stop to think that the wall is there to see how bad you want to get out? Meaning if you make the changes in your life, that anything is possible.
Watching this, I couldn't help but thinking that this, in part, came from the soul of someone who is on death row. And while it's difficult for me to really understand what it means to be on death row, I have an idea of what it means to languish in an empty space with nowhere to go, no future, no aspirations, but yet to be able to free the soul to the point where you can create something that is just magnificent, that everybody will appreciate, will love. And perhaps this person was thinking that if you can't embrace me for who I am today, then you can embrace what I have created as part of my humanity. And I can relate to that in a very personal way, because there was a time where I thought that I was going to die in prison. And I imagine people on death row think of the same way, that they're going to die in prison. But yet they could create something that may not be visible right away. The value of it, the beauty of it may not be visible right away, but in time, it will cover a lot of people's lives. And I just, it's my first time seeing something so magnificent. It certainly won't be my last. And believe me when I tell you that we have men in our prison system and women whose humanity is just as beautiful.
How do I follow that, right? So, this was also my first time ever seeing a ballet, and I want to thank the choreography, the young ladies who were in it. It was beautiful, and I really appreciated all the work you've done to put into presenting this to us, and thank you. The main thing that resonated for me was in the beginning of the ballet when the young lady was isolated. And it made me think about when I was in prison. And as Mingo said, sometimes prison is not just a wall. When I was inside, I sort of put myself inside a prison within a prison, thinking that no one was there for me, nobody could help me, I was alone in this, and that I was isolated. And for the first 10 years of my prison sentence, I numbed myself with drugs. I did not follow any rules. I just felt like my life was over. And after the first part of the ballet, they came back and the other young lady touched her lightly, and it put a spark in her. And then she touched her again, and it put another spark in her. And I had a mentor, Kathy Boudin, while I was in prison, who was that person that gave me that spark. She told me that I could write. She told me that I was important. She told me that my life had meaning. And the ballet resonated all of this for me. And coming home, doing the work that I do, it just touched me so much. And it brought tears to my soul. And I just want to say I thank you again.
So something that stayed with me in my experience as a volunteer in a correctional facility is the capacity of this institution, the prison, to dehumanize. I'm wondering what you did to claim and reclaim your humanity and your dignity when you were incarcerated.
Well, for myself, I had a lot of support. I had, like Jose talks about, you have people inside that, for whatever reason, they see something in you and they don't let you get down on yourself, and they're there to try to lift you up. And you have a number of amazing people, and there's too many to mention. And I learned that although I was in prison, I couldn't let my heart, my mind, and my spirit stay locked up and be in prison. And despite the circumstances, and despite what Jose talks about wondering if you're gonna die inside, you know, you just fight through it. You find a way. And then you say to yourself, well, what other options is there? You either fight or you give up. And so you have to find a way to dig down deep. And no matter what happens to you, whether it's good or bad, you know, you take those lessons. And I think that it's unrealistic, particularly in that setting, to try to go through life and seek pleasure and avoid pain, when the very reason for our existence as human beings is to experience what happens to us, so we can take those lessons and we can grow from them. And so that's what worked for me, you know, and just kind of having positive thoughts and reading positive things and being around positive people. And I remember reading in a program about, there was one particular song that always kept me going, and it was Zoom by the Commodores. And it talked about how I'd like to fly far away from here, where my mind could refreshen again and I could be with, you know, people I love. And so it's little small things like that that became big things. And it helps inspire you to continue to grow. And it's kind of like a tree. I try to use the growth analogy as opposed to change, because I think somebody can change from being a good person to a bad person. Something happens, and then now you consider the bad person, and then you could change back to being a good. But I think with growth is like a tree analogy. You know, a tree is the foundation of life. And when a tree grows branches, that's us as human beings. And when it grows leaves, those are the choices and decisions we make in our lives. And that if you take care of the tree will bear fruit. And so with those kind of thoughts, and, you know, I kind of, you know, looked at it that way and just always try to keep a positive attitude and not let anybody or anything steal my joy for living.
Thank you. An applause for every question. Thank you.
In the early 90s, before then, I had people who taught me things of how to survive in prison, for the most part, but they didn't address character defects. I had to address these things on my own, or search for someone who would give me some type of guidance. And I'll say the Department of Corrections doesn't offer guidance for this. Not a single program to take responsibility for harm done, harm you committed personally, or to develop insight into that harm, how that really impacts human beings. People taught me how to do that, people who cared about me. And one elder person took me to a classroom, and the classroom was packed. And the instructor recently died, a couple of days ago, in fact. But he wrote 3 rules on the blackboard. Simple, I mean, really super simple rules. And he told the classroom that if you live by these 3 simple rules, you will not only better yourself, you will better others around you, and you will be of value to your community. The first rule, get out of prison as soon as possible. Sounds simple. Sounds simple. But that entails doing things that will help you get out as soon as possible and avoiding things that will keep you in prison. The second rule, get out a better human being. Sounds simple enough, but the things you have to discard within yourself and the values that you have to embrace to become a better human being is a task. And the third is encourage others to live by these 3 rules. And I tried to do that. Since the early 90s, I tried to do that because the man who brought me to that class also taught me that if you never get out of prison, if you're going to die in prison, at least die an honorable man. And sadly, I never got a chance to thank him. So this is the only way I could thank him, by passing on these 3 rules to everyone I encounter.
So my road wasn't that easy. Like I explained before, I suffered with a lot of low self-esteem, depression, even to the point where I wanted to end my own life. And it wasn't an easy road. Growing up, I always wanted to be a nurse, and I always wanted to take care of animals. And in Bedford Hills, they had a puppy program, Puppies Behind Bars. And I applied for the program, I got accepted, and it changed my life. I was responsible for taking care of another living thing. We had our dogs in our rooms with us, in our cells with us 24/7. I had to feed the dog, change the dog, clean the dog, take care of the dog's medical needs, rec the dog, walk the dog, and train with the dog. And this was on a daily basis, but it gave me purpose. And when we first started out, we trained dogs for the Guiding Eyes for the Blind. And then after 9/11, we switched over to service dogs. When the veterans came in that received those dogs, it was just an unbelievable experience. These were men and women that served and gave their life, some of them their lives, some of them their arms, their legs, their eyes, being blown up by IEDs, EDs, and it was just, when they came there and they took our hand and said, thank you for changing my life. That was the best experience that I've had, being someone who had caused harm and knowing that I did something to enhance someone's life. And throughout the years, I raised dogs for 15 years while I was inside. And it was the best experience that I had, and it helped me to grow as a person. It helped me to be a part of a community. It helped me to realize that I was worthy and that I could make changes in my life and other people's lives. And I just want to say also that throughout my whole 39 years in prison, I've had amazing people friends, volunteers that will come in. A few of them are here today. One is Cindy and Michael, they're sitting back there. And the last 5 years of my incarceration, Michael came into prison to visit me once a week, to sit down with me and help me process what I was going through and help me understand what I was going through. We meditated. I came to grips with who I was and where I was at, and I learned to just be. And another person here is Elaine Lord, who was so instrumental as the superintendent in Bedford Hills. She gave the women there autonomy. She gave us the freedom to create programs that we needed inside. She gave us the freedom to be mothers, to be women, and just to create a world that was going to help us when we came back into society. And I just want to thank you all, and also my friend Lamel, who I've known for over 50 years now? 50 years, who has been there for me while I was in prison. So it takes a community, and I guess everybody here today is here because they believe in criminal justice reform, but I just want to say this, that you guys are special, but let people know. Share it. Yeah. Make the community bigger, because it's not, the criminal injustice system is a system that targets Black and brown communities and poor people. It's a system that is built on $1 billion industry. It's a system that destroys families, it destroys communities, and it destroys people. And we have to change that. And we can do it if we all work together. But we have to believe, and we have to get people involved, and we have to go and advocate for it. And I just want to also say too, that when I came home, I found out that like people that have IRAs, bank accounts, a lot of these things are being funded. You think you're investing in money, you're investing in stuff, and you're getting a return, but you're perpetuating mass incarceration. So I would advise people to look through your financial advisors and ask them, like, what is in my mutual fund? What is in my accounts? So we don't keep perpetuating this $1 billion industry that has perpetual punishment off of Black and brown and poor people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for your vulnerability in answering these questions. Jarvis noted that when you're in prison, your family's in prison with you. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the impact that your incarceration had on family or your friends.
As I said, I spent 4 decades in prison for a crime I didn't commit. And I know how hard it was on my family. They supported me the entire time. And I knew that as much as I was physically in prison, they were doing time just like I was, because they were impacted by it. So while I was inside, I wouldn't ask for anything. And they would always ask me, why you don't ask me, why you don't ask me? But I've always felt like I was a burden, to my family by being in there. And so I kind of just try to live on my own, so to speak. And I've seen the effects that it has on families. And since I've been home, I see firsthand the struggle that families have to go through, going into the prison, being processed, being treated like they're in prison. The changes that they have to go through, the struggles financially, emotionally. I've seen it firsthand. So it's one thing to be inside and just think about your family doing those things, but it's another to actually see it and experience, it from outside. And so I knew it was a heavy burden on them. And in fact, one of the people who was instrumental in pushing really hard to get me out was my niece. And when I went to prison, she wasn't even born. But yet here's a young lady that, you know, we developed such a relationship, a strong bond over the years. And, you know, she took it upon herself, gathered her friends together, and she utilized social media to create an enormous campaign to release me. You know, talk about a TV commercial, billboard ads, 145,000 people on a petition. You know, she did, her and her friends did all this incredible work. So, you know, just to do that shows how much love and that was there existed between us. And it's tough, you know, and we take for granted. And I think the people who are harmed most are the children. Because, you know, they're impacted by it, because many of the men and women inside are mothers and fathers. And it causes them a lot of harm, you know, because the kids act up. You know, they go through all these emotional changes where they don't know how to express what they're feeling because they're too young to fully understand. And the impact is devastating. And during my time inside, I worried more about them than I worried about myself, because I knew how they were suffering silently and not complaining and just doing whatever needed to be done. So the impact is great, it's huge, and they need support. And so since I've been home, I try to do everything I can to try to find a way to give them back the support they gave me. And I think one of the ways I can do that is by being a voice for the voiceless and doing the work that we do, and so I can leave footprints for other people to emulate.
When I was arrested, I had 4 children, ages 1 through 8. 2 boys and 2 girls. One day, I just ain't come home. My case involved the shooting of a police officer, so it was publicized in the news. They saw it. And I had no idea of what they would go through from that day on. The harm that they would suffer, emotional, psychological harm. We talk about a period where having an incarcerated parent was not considered an adverse childhood experience. No one thought that. No one thought anything about it. It was only happening to black and brown kids for the most part. Years later, it was identified as an adverse childhood experience and addressed. So now we have organizations that's really addressing the needs of children with incarcerated parents. But I'll give you 2 instances to show you how devastating this is. When my youngest daughter was going to college, her first year of college, now she's able to visit me by herself. She came, she surprised me with a visit. I haven't seen her in a while. And she wasn't very talkative. She came to tell me something, but didn't know how to tell me. And sometime during the middle of the visit, she finally just broke down and told me that she grew up resenting me. Now, I tried the best I could to maintain ties with my kids. And I didn't understand that, so it kind of took me by surprise. I said, why? And then she named every special occasion in her life that I wasn't there. And she said sometimes she would just cry because she wanted to talk to me and I wasn't there. And she couldn't explain it to anybody else. And then she told me about a pact that they made, my 2 boys and 2 girls. They made a pact that they would not have any children out of fear that their child's father may be in prison and their children will go through the same thing they went through. That's how devastating it was for them. And I tell you that we are still dealing with this. It doesn't go away. And this is one of the reasons why I began to develop programs to address this issue of children with incarcerated parents as invisible victims. And we're too caught up in our case that we just overlook the silent suffering that they spent almost their entire lives. This is devastating, and it's intergenerational. They pass it on. Grandchildren, third generation is also suffering from this. And I'll end with, during my 38 years of imprisonment, I've seen father and son in the same prison. Sometimes 3 generations in the same prison. I've seen a little boy coming with his mother to see dad, and 15 years later, that little boy is in prison with me. And I don't even recognize him, although I've seen him grow up in the visiting room, and to my oldest daughter, seeing him one day, and I said, who are you talking to? Why are you talking to that dude? She said, that's so-and-so. I said, wow, look at this. You know, it's just, the impact is still being researched, because it's so deep to know that your dad or your mom, it's probably worse with the mom, is in prison, and you can't speak to anybody about it.
So, when I came to prison, I was 17 years old, and my mother was a heroin addict. I saw her one time when I was on Rikers Island, and she cried and blamed herself for me being arrested. And the next time I saw her, I was 32 years old, and I was going to her funeral. I advocate for women and girls because when you incarcerate a woman, you incarcerate a whole community. Most of the women that come to prison have children under the age of 18. And when these women come to prison, a lot of these children are placed in foster care. And foster care creates more harm and more violence in these children's lives. If they're not in foster care, they're with relatives. Some of the relatives live in different states or live so far away from the prisons that it's hard to visit. Some of the relatives don't like what the parent had went to prison for and refuse to have the children go and visit them. So on every level, the mother is being punished, the kids are being punished, and it's just a horrible situation that the children have to experience. While I was inside, I worked in the parenting center, and I taught parenting classes, and Kathy Boudin and I had created a curriculum, Parenting from a Distance. The majority of women in that group had been sexually assaulted. These are things that people don't realize. The violence, that's how Jose said, the ACEs study, the violence that people and women come to prison with, the trauma that they come to prison with. People don't understand. In our communities, we don't have resources. We don't have centers that we could go to get mental health treatment. We don't have community centers that our children can go to and play. We don't have good playgrounds. We don't have any of that. And we know that the safest communities are the communities with what? Resources. And that's why we fight. We're fighting for this, and we want people to understand that we all have to work together to bring this country into a place where we need to be. Because people should not have to suffer. Children should not have to grow up worrying about a parent in prison. And then we are going back to the prison industrial complex. Phone calls are expensive. They have taken packages away from, people can't come visit somebody and bring a package. The packages have to come from these billion-dollar corporations that are making this crazy amount of money, and people can't eat. I ended up having lupus, finding out I had lupus when I was inside. You know, the diet they give for lupus is the same diet they give for diabetes. It's the same diet they give for any other medical condition. You know, my co-defendant, Valerie Gator, she passed away in prison. They misdiagnosed her. They told her that she had acid reflux and she had throat cancer. And she died the same day that she was supposed to be signing papers to get released. So it's so many things that go on inside of prison, and the families, the black and brown and poor people are the ones who suffer the most. The families suffer. And then, you know, people want to look and say, oh, well, they're no good. They don't want to work. They don't want to do this. But it's a story that comes before that. And we have to look at those stories and not at that one moment in time. Because families are important to everybody, even if you're in prison.
We're going to open it up to questions from the floor, but before we do that, I just have one final question, and that is, if there was one thing that every person in the United States could know about the prison system, what would you want each person to know?
There's so many things, but it's hard to just pick one thing. To know that people are human beings, and people sometimes make poor choices, bad decisions. I don't call them mistakes. Harming somebody is not a mistake. And just the idea that the system exists because of the lack of opportunities. Like Roz was talking about the community I came from, there was a lack of opportunities. And because there's a lack of opportunities, the only thing around you is your neighborhood. So kids grow up believing that prison is like a badge of honor, so to speak. I've had students that come from poor communities come into the prison and talk about how when they walk through the prison hallway, it reminded them of the projects where they grew up. Another one said when he walked through the hallway, it reminded him of his high school. So the transition, they now without realizing they're being set up, the transition from where they live to prison doesn't seem to be that difficult because the communities they come from are prisons within themselves. And so we talk about, you know, perpetual punishment, but you can't have perpetual punishment without education or without opportunity. So even people inside prison that may have committed harm, they still need education and they still need opportunity to redeem themselves. So.
The one thing that I think is very fundamental to this discussion is prisons don't work. They don't do what they say prisons do. At the height of mass incarceration in New York State, we had 72,000 men and women in prison. Right now, we have more men and women serving life sentences than at any time during the history of New York. So if prisons and these long sentences, if they work, we'd be the safest state in the union. They don't work. In fact, they make matters worse. And the only reason why we don't have more massacres like in Attica, the only reason why is because incarcerated people actually take on that responsibility as part of their rehabilitation, as part of seeking redemption. They take on that responsibility to educate themselves and educate others, to guide younger generation so that they can envision a future that doesn't involve harming people, drugs, gangs. In our society now, the worst neighborhoods, what people would call the worst neighborhoods, you have men and women who are credible messengers, real credible messengers, who are doing what they did for decades without being paid and doing it now once they're released. And that is more in tune with community safety than prisons and long prison sentences. In fact, when you sentence someone years and decades unnecessarily, some of my mentors never had a chance to do what they've done with me and my generation to a younger generation in the streets of New York City. They never had that opportunity. And who's harmed with that? When you deprive a community of that type of leadership, grassroots community leadership, the communities are harmed by this approach to dealing with interpersonal harm. You know, as a society, there gotta be a better way.
I'm gonna say join RAPP. That, but prisons do not make anyone's streets safer. They don't. And that's a lie that the politicians will tell you. That's a message that they will put out there. Let's lock them up. Let's throw away the key. Let's keep our streets safe because the criminals are there. It's a lie. The rhetoric around mass incarceration and prisons is a lie. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, Michael.
First of all, it's great to have three important activists in our midst. RAPP has really moved the needle on some very important bills, like fair and timely and elder parole. These are things that we can all participate in reinforcing by getting in touch with our state senators, with people like Chris Burdick, our assemblyman, to really try to get these passed this year. They didn't pass last year, but now we have another opportunity to do that. And all of you have worked very hard for that. I was surprised that you didn't mention elder parole, because we have, having worked inside Bedford Hills, there are so many people like Kim Brown. I knew Val Gator, and she was a beautiful person. And it was tragic that she never got a chance to enjoy freedom. We worked on a project with Val. She was a wonderful audio engineer, and somebody from the outside came in, and said, if you ever get out, I will give you a job in our professional audio, and so there's so much wasted talent being warehoused, people spending decades and decades and decades, and it's tragic. And hopefully some of these bills that you have worked for will be passed.
Can I just say something about that? I'm a member of Chris Burdick's Advisory Correction Committee. The Assembly, he's a great Assembly member. And you're right about the elder parole bill. We advocate as a means of uprooting the legacy of racism and correcting the crisis that mass incarceration has created in our prison system. The wrong prison systems in the beginning, and little opportunity or no opportunity in the back end creates that crisis in between, people just getting old, sick, and dying. So that other parole bill will be a corrective measure to stop, this crisis of people needlessly dying in prison at a relatively young age of 58 years old.
Could I add something? In addition to the elder bill and the fair and timely parole bill, RAPP also does clemency work. Clemency, for the most part, is something that's rarely given out. I received it, so I know the history behind it when it came into play. And so we created this team to put together and push for clemency, because the governor has the unchallenged power to grant clemencies whenever they want. And years past, they've been granting it once a year for Christmas time. So if you have 20, 30 people throughout the state applying for clemency, usually only maybe 2 or 3 will get it. They may say the governor grants 21 clemencies, but this is misleading because, say, 16 of the people are people who are already home, have been home for decades, and they committed a crime years ago, and you ask them the governor to grant you clemency on that, so it's very misleading. And I know what you're talking about education in prison, and I think education in prison is critical, because that's the one thing that can determine whether or not somebody can really change. All of us went to college while we were inside. There's mandatory programs that everyone has to take, so that's not something you can say you voluntarily took. But college is something, and in fact, just to show you, Thursday, I went back into the prison I was released from. And the reason I went back was to receive my college degree. And so, college, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. For the most part, college is critical inside, because when we talk about perpetual punishment, educating people, and it just opens so many doors, and it helps people to change their lives.
Yep.
Yeah, the prison industrial complex is such a gigantic problem. You've already mentioned 2 things: check your investments, look into RAPP, and support that organization. Is there anything else that you could recommend that everybody in this room can do tomorrow, Monday, just to move the needle a little bit further?
Send letters to your assembly people, your council people, invite us up here to come and talk to people. If you have different groups of churches, different organizations that, we'll come up and we'll have a conversation and we'll get people involved. Like, people want to know, you could go on our website, on RAPP's website, get information. We have an open invitation for new members every third Thursday of the month. Come on, we're here. We want to change. We want to change the world. We want to end this perpetual punishment, and we want to end mass incarceration, and we can do it. We can do it. I believe it.
What are the names of the bills, and when will they be coming up before the legislature?
The elder parole bill is Holman in the Senate. It's the lead sponsor. And in the Assembly is Davila, Assembly Member Davila. The fair and timely parole bill, Senator Julio Salazar is the lead sponsor. And in the Assembly is Assembly Member David Webber. These 2 bills have passed the Crimes Committee in the past. We're trying to get them to the committee this year, through all the committees, and be placed on the floor. We have roughly, let me see, 32, we need 32 co-sponsors in the bill to have the majority in the Senate. We have 29. In the Assembly, we have 69, we need 76. The bills are very close, but we believe we have the majority for both bills in both houses, because we have people who, while they will not co-sponsor, they have committed to pass the bills if they're put on the floor.
Is all that information on the RAPP website?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And did you want to answer the other question too? About, you know, what can you do on Monday morning? Was there anything you wanted to add to what Ross said?
This is a very, very sensitive discussion, crime and punishment. But it's a discussion that we need to have. You know, have this discussion. We're more than willing to discuss this with anybody. You know, I'll be frank. I didn't go to prison for 38 years for singing too loud in the choir. You know, let's be real. We do not shun the harm that we did. You know, we're straight up. We're very transparent about this. But the discussion should not just be about punishment. The discussion, you know, we're the Empire State here. You know, and during the Rockefeller era, where the Rockefeller drug laws, you remember that? New York took the lead and became the model in addressing the drug problem with the harsh sentencing under the Rockefeller. But then they found out that it was a mistake. And it was a racist mistake. But yet they took the lead. So now we're asking to, let's have these discussions now so that we, as the Empire State, can take the lead in addressing interpersonal harm in a more humane way. Because the people who are harmed by crime are just treated like non-human. They're treated almost the same as we are. Because after they testify and the person is convicted, there are no resources for them. In fact, they encourage them to hold that hatred in their heart, so they never heal. So we're saying let's find a way where those who've been harmed get a real opportunity to heal, and those who harm also get an opportunity to heal.
Yeah. And I would just add to that, talk to your family, your friends, your neighbors about what you experienced here tonight, what you learned about the prison industrial complex, about RAPP. And it is a hard conversation to have. But you know, I believe if you put an intention out there to look for an opportunity to have that conversation, then that opportunity will open up.
And it's just community building. You know, if each one of us here tonight go and we get 5 people.
That's right.
5 people we know and ask them to become involved in the work. And we ask each one of those 5 to get 5 more. We can build a community that's safe, that's healing, and because none of us is as strong or as good as all of us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, so I think we have one more question. Yeah, yes, sir.
This isn't a question, it's a statement. You asked, what can you do? And what my experience is, I visited Roz for many, many years, and I visited many other people, but the transformation for me was my idea of what people in prison are, who I think they are, right? We're told that people are a certain way, and you know, I'm a pretty liberal person, but I had a certain idea of what somebody in prison was. And for me, the magic was, when I visited Roz and then a bunch of other people, was I realized they're just like me. They actually are just like me. And in fact, if I had the upbringing that Roz had, I would go home and I'd say, I'd probably be in prison. I might have done the same thing. And all those judgments went away. So what can you do? Visit the prison and see what's really there. And when you know that, you can tell people about it. And I think the problem, at least for me, was just what my idea was. It was based on nothing, based on not really experiencing it. And that was a remarkable change for me. And I invite you all to participate, because it's amazing that the negative judgments that we hold, and not just about that, about all kinds of things in your life, block or get in the way of connection, communication, and working together as a whole. So that's what I wanted to say.
Well, I, for one, really appreciate you sharing your time and sharing yourself. So I want to show my appreciation.